Welcome to Plot Twist Radio, the show where creativity, storytelling, and the unpredictable path of the creative life all collide. I'm your host, Erin Egnatz. Well, hello, Doctor, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Erin. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
It's great to have you. Before we get going, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. My name is James Gregory, and I have been around for many years. In the early years, met my wife 23. We were both 23 years old. Met her on a subway in New York, and were so ambitious. We decided to launch a business together at 23 years old, and we launched it on Madison Avenue. It was this little tiny advertising agency, and it was became a success. We developed something called corporate branding, and then promoted the heck out of it with books. We wrote a lot of books on the subject, and the books were great. And McGraw-Hill was my publisher, and Business Week, which was owned by McGraw-Hill, was my client. And so it was just the ideal situation for an author and a business person to have these books being published and your clients sending you around the world to talk about the books. I mean, it just couldn't have been any better. And I thought that was what life was all about. The writing was easy. Publishing a book was easy. I found out later when I when I sold the business and started writing memoirs and started writing novels that it was not so easy. I no longer had big McGraw-Hill behind me. I was out there publishing on my own and getting clobbered, not getting the volume of sales that I had expected. And I learned that that's the dilemma of most authors. Not all, many of them do very, very well, but it's a tough road as an independent author to not only to write your book, but then to publish it and market it. So that's kind of the story that since I sold the business in 2013. I went back and got my doctorate in business because there were some things in my business career that I wanted to prove. Made claims in my books, but I wanted to prove it out for myself more than anything else. And then suddenly I found out that I don't like golf, so I decided to start writing, and I am a storyteller, so I love storytelling, and most of the fiction I've written relates to things that I've experienced.
That is quite the journey, and I love that you went back to get the PhD. That's kind of like I didn't get the PhD, at least not yet. I might still do that, but that's how I was with my master's. I was like, you know what? I need to go up a little bit more. I just want to do it for me. That's why I did it. So I love that you did that, and it has to be such an accomplishment.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it as a retirement thing to do. It completely consumed 3 years of my life at a very important time. It's turning 65, and I'm, okay, I'll take 3 years to do this. It's like not great, but I learned an awful lot, and really the writing was so intense, and the analytics that we were doing was so intense that I got energized for writing. I became for research and writing. I just had really developed it into a fine point, and that's what made it easier to do.
Very cool. So, as you said, you didn't just retire, you reinvented. What pushed you into fiction versus your previous books?
Well, I wrote several memoirs. One was called Small Fortunes, which was the story. It's this whole series of novellas, which is the story of how my wife and I built the business, how we met, how we built, launched this business, watched it grow. It became an international business for consulting on corporate brands. We traveled the world, and so and then we had a crisis is various crises. Is it crises? Crisis that
Crazy.
that we experienced. People, somebody tried to undermine the company while we were traveling, and my wife got on a plane and went back and solved the problem. So it's like how we work together through very difficult situations. And she's still my buddy. I mean, she tolerates me, and she tolerated the PhD effort. She tolerated me through all these different things that I'm writing, and I can't ask for anything more than that.
So let's pivot over to your newest book. You have a treat for us, do you not?
Well, I thought, there's some paranormal stuff that you'd like to touch on in your various recordings, and I thought I would just read one, 30-second passage out of the Ghost Town. Ghost Town is my latest book, and it's a story about Sammy Murphy, who is the firstborn boy, his firstborn child in a town called Crystal Creek. It's later changed. They changed the name to Sulphur Creek because the beautiful stream was ruined by the coal mines with sulfur in them. But that's another part of the story. But so this story follows Sammy Murphy through his life, and he's about 15 years old in this segment, and he's exploring the area around Crystal Creek, and he follows the waters, the stream, to the headwaters of Crystal Creek, which is up in the mountains away from the town. And all of a sudden, he discovers this beautiful little cabin. Now, the cabin had clearly been abandoned for at least 3 to 5 years. It was starting to fall apart, but as he's exploring around the cabin, this is where this little paragraph picks up. There was a consistent sound emanating from the structure. The sound was three tones, almost sounding human, but caused by the breeze rubbing a pine bough on the roof. Sammy made his way to the decrepit privy, then opened the door. The scene inside made him scream louder than he knew he was capable. A full skeleton sat upright on the seat, with a little left of his clothing except his work boots. The skull seemed to be looking right at Sammy as if trying to speak. The skull and the pine boughs seemed to be asking the same question. Who are you? They waited patiently for an answer. I'm Sammy Murphy from Crystal Creek. Don't mind me, I'm just passing through, he responded self-consciously. He was aware that he didn't believe in ghosts, but also that he didn't want to irritate whatever this spirit represented. So the ghosts in Ghost Town are kind of like the chorus in a Greek tragedy. They're off stage and they're asking him questions. They're coaxing him along. They're wondering what he's up to now, and they keep reappearing periodically throughout the book, but not in a way that causes fear or interferes at all with his life. It's almost like his self-conscious and wondering what this is all about. A lot of fun.
That sounds very interesting. I know the reader or the listeners, I should say, will love to read it. What was the spark that started Ghost Town for you?
Well, this is also a very interesting story. Everything I do is based on some seed that was planted in my mind. When I was about 10 years old, my dad and I always did projects together. He made work fun. And so he would invite me along to do things. And we traveled up to a coal mine to get coal for our house. And we had a pickup truck, and so they would come out from the mine and load it directly onto the truck from this tipple above the truck. But when we arrived at the coal mine, it was a terrible town. Just a very sad looking town. None of the houses had fresh paint on them. The tipple itself, I didn't think it could hold the coal car, but out from the mine comes a 10-year-old boy, and he is completely covered in black soot, and all I could see were his eyes. Now, my dad knew that Mr. Murphy, who owned the mine, and he knew that he had a son that would help him. So here he wanted me to meet that son, and the son, known as Murph, invited me to go into the mine with him. Well, I looked at my dad and, pleading to say, just say no, to say, Don't let me go." But I wasn't about to say no. So Murph challenges me to walk into the mine with him. When we're walking in, and it gets darker and darker as we go into the mine, and I'm freaking out. I can't see. I don't know what I'm doing. And all of a sudden, I heard our car, the railroad car, the little mine cars that are filled with coal. I heard the one that was coming to dump the coal into our truck. I heard it coming, and it made this reverberation that was so loud and shocked me so much. I just ran out of the coal mine. Well, for decades later, and even now, I can still hear Murph laugh. He laughed so hard he almost couldn't stand up
Oh, no.
that I freaked out. So this was my chance, this is stuck in my mind all these years. And I just started writing the story. I just started writing as if, where who was Smurf? And his name is Sammy Murphy I don't know whether that was his real name the young man that I met, but I do know his name was Murph. Anyway, so Sammy Murphy, what was it like when he was born? What were his parents like? How did his life evolve in this little tiny town? And how did he survive his life? So he's the protagonist, okay? He's the guy that we're following. His heart is pure. It's unencumbered with any civilization or experiences outside the mind. And the antagonist is a guy by the name of Barry Bacon. Now, Barry Bacon grew up in New York City, and he was on Fifth Avenue, and he associated with the likes of Carnegie and Frick and Mellon and all of those folks. He was younger than them, but he aspired to be like them. So when he reached a certain age, he decided to head out to Western Pennsylvania where the action was, then the iron and coal industry. And he was going to get a corner on the coal market. That was his plan. And he buys this mine. And the difference between these two, the contrast between these two, one was, Bacon was an employer and didn't have much to do with his employees, but they keep confronting each other, not in a bad way, but just through everyday life. Like, for example, it turns out that Barry Bacon owned the property where this little cabin was, and Sammy Murphy didn't want to tell him about the cabin because then it would be part of his property, but Sammy wanted it for his own as his own little cabin in the woods, and nobody had even knew it was there. So those type of confrontations, and they keep getting growing and growing as time goes on, and really become a crisis toward the end. The town gets wiped out, and the little town of Crystal Creek gets wiped out in a storm, a bad storm, rainstorm, and everybody abandons the town. A lot of people are killed, and the mine collapses, and the infrastructure is destroyed for the mine. So they just leave, and they go to the nearest big town, which is Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And as an historian, you probably are aware of the Johnstown Flood. And having grown up there, I mean, we were indoctrinated with the Johnstown Flood and everything that went along with it. And so this Barry Bacon becomes the caretaker of the dam and becomes responsible. Now, this is where historical fiction and fiction really separate, because he was not responsible for the cause of the flood, but somewhat, I mean, I made the connection and to make the story good. So anyway, and then the people were after him. They want to lynch him. They want to string him up because he was the cause of killing so many people in Johnstown. But Sammy brings him to justice.
Wow. Now, see, as I was reading that, that was, I was thinking the Johnstown Flood, of course. I don't think there's a lot of information unless you're from Pennsylvania, like right in that area. A lot of people don't know about the Johnstown Flood, which surprises me, but it is one of my, I don't want to say favorite because obviously it's not a good thing, but it's one of my favorites to explore and look into. So I love that you're bringing that into historical fiction. Historical fiction is my favorite. Someone asked me once, they're like, well, as a historian, does historical fiction bother you? I'm like, no, we picture ourselves in those times all the time. So,
Exactly, exactly.
yeah.
My brother wrote a truly great version of the history of Johnstown. It's called The Bosses Club, and his name is Richard Gregory. And his book is just extraordinary because it starts with the very early aspects of Johnstown and how it grew as an industrial base, and then how this dam became a very important part of the city, and how it evolved over time. And it was a long-term issue of mismanagement of the dam that caused the problem. And Andrew Carnegie actually, in my brother's book, could have been responsible for the cause of the flood. So I think you would really enjoy that that
I-
book as well. I don't want to unsell Ghost Town.
Right, right. Yes, but I'll have to check that out. But where can the listeners find you and Ghost Town? Because like, I've read it, like I said, and it's exceptional. So where can they find you?
Well, they can buy it at Amazon or Barnes& and Noble or anywhere any books are sold, they can buy it. The Also, my website is jamesrgregory-books.com, and I'd love to hear from anyone who's interested in communicating about it or interested in my other books. All my business books and all my, memoirs and all of that stuff is on that website.
Well, I will make sure that all the links are in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been wonderful.
Great pleasure, Aaron. Thank you for inviting me.